So I guess our research area can sort of stem back to, not a good start. Okay, so back in 1980, Justin Carpenter suggested that when the reader tries to interpret each word of a text as soon as his cognitive system encounters it, rather than routinely buffering information until more words have been read. So according to what they term the immediacy hypothesis, there's a very tight link between fixation, location, and attention. And there's very good evidence that this is the case. So fixation durations on a word are very much influenced by the properties of that word. So within this context, we can think about what drives the eyes through text and how attention is distributed in different ways. So very broadly speaking, there are two main classes of model of eye movement control that try to conceptualize the way the eyes move through text. There are the serial models that assume just one word is lexically processed at a time. And these obviously have their origins within the immediacy hypothesis, assuming a very tight link between fixation, location, and attention. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we've got the parallel models, and the parallel models assume a slightly looser link, if you like, between fixation, location, and attention. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to describe the two models in a little bit more depth along with some of their predictions. Okay, so first off then, so the most prominent model of the parallel variety is undoubtedly, you probably all know Swift, we all know this stuff, I'm sorry. Okay, so according to Swift, as many as 4 words can be processed, lexically processed at once, providing they fall within the effective span of apprehension, which McConkie and Rain have shown extends from very minimum 4 character spaces to the left up to about 15 character spaces to the right of fixation. So providing words fall within this effective span of apprehension and the fixated word isn't absorbing too many attentional resources, according to this model, as many as 4 words can be lexically processed, up to and including the semantic level at once. Okay, so serial models, we've obviously just had Eric here, so you probably know all about serial models, but they also have a very different conceptualization of the way the eyes move through text. So according to these models, only one word is lexically processed at a time, and once that word has been lexically processed, attention can move forward to the next word in text before the eye catches up. So this is obviously a very primitive example of how a serial model will work. More recently, the proponents of the easy reader have incorporated a stage that they refer to as L1. So this is operation defined as 67% of the total time needed to gain lexical access on a word. So it suggested that once this level has been reached, cicadas plan to the next word, and because that takes on average 175 milliseconds, this allows for a currently fixated word to reach lexical access. So that's the second stage of lexical access on the word. It allows attention to move forwards to the next word in text before the eye eventually catches up. So this L1 stage basically reduces the amount of time that attention can be ahead of the eye. So the important thing then to note, I guess, is that the amount of parafoveal preview a word can get prior to fixation can only be a function of the amount of time needed to execute a cicade from the moment you want to plan it, minus the amount of time to recognise the fixated word, minus the amount of time needed to shift attention from one word in text to the next, which I think in the model is 15 milliseconds, roughly. So within these very tight time constraints, typically only the very early stages of word recognition you can occur on a word. So for example, the extraction of the orthographic and phonological code, but typically these models don't tend to predict high-level semantic codes being extracted from parafoveal words. So that was obviously a very crude and very gross oversimplification of both models, so obviously far more complicated than that. But I hope I've been able to convey the point I was trying to make, which is simply that while parallel models do allow for multiple words to be lexically processed up to and including the semantic level simultaneously, serial models typically don't.
Laura, quick question. Does that apply to for skipping?
Does it apply to for skipping?
Because if you skip a word and it's like either predictable from the preceding context or not, have you not processed it then?
Yeah, so that was a really crude explanation. So, but no, for skipping, then yeah, you can get like double attention shifts, and yeah, so you can process the parafoveal word, and then you can cancel the cicade through that word if you can do it within the first stage of M1, and then you can replan. So yeah. It's a very crude explanation.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. Alright, so the sorts of information we can extract from a word to the right of fixation has typically been studied using the boundary paradigm. So with these sorts of experiments, what we do is present participants with sentences in which a critical word is masked, or it receives a valid or invalid preview prior to fixation. And basically, a change is triggered once the eye lands on the word. So once it passes the space just prior to the word, the preview pops up. And because this happens during an eye movement when we're functionally blind, participants aren't showing notice of these changes occurring, so it gives us a sensitive measure of how much pre-processing was done on the word prior to fixation. So what we can then do is we look at the fixation durations on the target word when it received a valid preview compared to when it didn't, and this obviously gives us a sensitive measure of how much pre-processing was done on the word. Okay, so what we see here, I think you all know this, is an instance of an orthographic preview benefit, where denying the visual features of the parafoveal word results in shorter fixation durations when that word is fixated. There's also evidence that we can extract parafoveal words from logical code, so that if the preview included a phonologically similar word, fixation durations on that target will be shorter than if it was a phonologically unrelated preview. There has, however, been to date no convincing evidence that a word's semantic code can be extracted prior to fixation. So if a semantically related preview is supplied, fixation durations are not typically shorter compared to when a semantic unrelated word preview is supplied. Okay. So I just want to run through a semantic preview benefit with you just now. So these were this was first studied by Rayner and colleagues back in 1986, and what he did is he presented participants with these sentences, or sentences like these, in which the participant, the top line here, the word changes to itself, so that's just our standard baseline, but then the preview either contains semantically related, semantically unrelated, or just an orthographically similar non-word. And only once the eye passed the invisible boundary located just before the target, gone too far, did the actual preview of the correct preview of the target word appear. So despite finding effects of prime relatedness in a pronunciation task, they found absolutely no evidence that the fixation durations on the target were shorter following a semantically related compared to an unrelated preview, which suggests that the semantic code was not extracted prior to fixation. I just want to take a moment to think about the logic behind doing these experiments. Okay, so you probably all know back in the early 1970s, semantic priming was studied by Meyer and Schwaneveld. And so what they did is they got participants to perform a lexical decision task, and the target words were preceded either by a semantically related word or a semantically unrelated word. And they found that response times were faster when they were preceded by a semantically related word. So here in a non-reading task, we seem to see evidence of facilitation between two semantic associates. We have a quick look. So these are just a couple of examples from the Rayner et al. Study from 1986. And hopefully you might be able to see a potential problem with extending these results that we have from lexical decision into semantic preview benefit experiments. So basically, in a lexical decision task, the words are obviously treated as separate entities. So it's perhaps not surprising that very opposite words like north might prime south, for example, love might prime hate. But in the context of a contingent change, it's unlikely these words are going to be treated as separate entities. So what you end up with is you end up with the concept or the meaning of one word changing to the concept or the meaning of the other word, of a different word, when the eye actually lands on it. So I guess what we're suggesting is that any facilitation you might have received from having a parafoveal word present in the paraphobia is then later offset by the fact that you've got this contingent change that's interfering with later word recognition. So this is actually something that Rayner and colleagues did acknowledge could be a problem in their 1986 paper, and they termed it the disruption hypothesis. So to test for the possibility, what they did is they got their participants to rate a bunch of their items, or rate all of their items, for semantic relatedness. Just the semantically related items, obviously, for semantic relatedness. They then reanalyzed their data only using the 20 items that were scored most highly in terms of semantic relatedness, and once again they didn't find a difference. But they got them to rate the sentences for overall similarity. So obviously this isn't going to necessarily capture the disruption that might have been caused in the mid-sentence region when the actual word change occurred. So I guess what we're saying is, while this perhaps may be suggesting that they're not causing interference, we don't know. It's still a possibility. So in an attempt to avert the problems with semantic facilitation / interference, Alter Rieber and colleagues tested Spanish-English bilinguals. So this allowed them to present sentences in one language, but then to present previews in an alternative language. So here they're not having to worry about the fact that the meanings were changing, because the meanings were the same, it's just they were presented in a different language. So in terms of their conditions, they obviously had the condition, the baseline condition, nothing changed, just basically the word changed to itself. And then the translations, they had a word that was both semantically and orthographically related, just semantically, just orthographically, or not related on either dimension. And once again, we see orthographic preview benefit, but no evidence of the semantic preview benefit. So once again, it seems like the orthographic code doesn't seem to be extracted from the parafoveal word. But there are a couple of problems with this sort of experiment as well. For one, we don't even know whether or not we should expect semantic facilitation between different languages. And also, as Hohenstein and colleagues pointed out in their experiment, there's potential switching costs because languages, the sentence is always presented in one language and the previews in another language. So, suggests semantic codes weren't being extracted. We've still got problems with these sorts of experiments as well. So this is the last experiment I'm just going to run through. And it's, this provides a little bit of evidence towards semantic codes being extracted prior to fixation. And it comes from Hohenstein and colleagues. It was a study conducted in German. Okay, so what they did is they drew on the work, the fast priming research of Suriner and Rayner from the early 1990s, and this allowed them to control the amount of time the parafoveal word was present prior to it being fixated. So the critical thing is basically when the eye landed on the pre-target word, the target word was either presented with a preview that was semantically related or semantically unrelated, and this preview was only presented for a period of 30, 80 or 125 milliseconds. And then once its prime duration expired, the preview disappeared, and basically the target word appeared after that time delay. So under these conditions, they found evidence that the semantically related words or previews resulted in shorter fixation durations on the targets compared to the unrelated words at the 125 millisecond prime duration. And when the preview was presented in bold typeface, this effect seemed to shift to 80 milliseconds, but no longer at 125. Okay, but so this does seem to suggest, perhaps, that semantic code was being extracted, but maybe at the longer delays, or when the preview wasn't was available for a full amount of time, it later then interfered with the target word durations. We've got problems with this experiment as well. The most obvious problem with this experiment is the fact that the second change happened when the eye was stationary. So normally, with gaze contingent experiments, we trigger the changes when the eye is in motion, so people are functionally blind, so they shouldn't notice the changes. But in this experiment, the second change from the prime to the target occurred when the eye was stationary, and whether participants report seeing a change or not, so whether it was a conscious or an unconscious thing, it's quite likely that this might have affected the way attention was distributed to the parafoveal word, and this actually could result in why we've got these effects here. And also, it's more an observation rather than a criticism, but the transient nature of the effect between experiments 1 and 2 and 3 is a little bit bizarre, and they don't seem to give a very good explanation as to why that actually happened. So what I've hopefully managed to convey with these 3 experiments is that when we're looking for facilitation effects in semantic preview benefits, there obviously comes all these problems to do with, are there problems to do with interference? When you try and get around it, doing it in different ways, you've got other problems. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to look to see whether or not meaning was extracted from a parafoveal word, but without getting sort of tied up with all these problems to do with, is it facilitation or interference? So, to do that, we drew on a well-replicated finding, so I'll sign this up there, that the presence of a plausible, implausible, or an anomalous word has a very different impact on eye movements when those words are fixated. Okay, I can't really see the screen, sorry. So in this example here, like I say, this is actually from an experiment that was conducted by Simon and Rayner and colleagues. So the noun, which is in red, carrots, not red, orange, sorry, was either plausible, implausible or anomalous given the preceding sentence context. And what they found is that gauge duration was significantly longer on the noun when the target word was anomalous. And in more recent research, and I think Simon might be involved with this maybe, these effects have been shown to come out even earlier. So these effects are coming through in first fixation duration. So it seems like, to quote the authors, that the anomaly hits you over the head. It has a very, very early impact on the eye movement record. And the effects of plausibility seem to come out much later. It's quite controversial, but there's even some evidence that severe implausibility or anomaly can be recognised even before the word is fixated.
Why is Joseph et al. Listed in there?
Sorry, I can't actually see the screen very well.
Why is Joseph et al. Listed in the parafoveal or foveal effects? Is that parafoveal meaning can influence pre-target fixations?
Yeah. Who, sorry?
The Joseph et al. 2008 study. I didn't think about that.
Maybe you talk about it. Maybe you're just listing studies that talk about it. You list studies that find evidence for it.
I think ones that found evidence.
Well,
It
that's
might have been like
interesting.
just if you just looked at like the last.
That Joseph et al. 2008 paper.
Yeah.
I'm a co-author on that, right?
Yeah. I think so.
So you were right.
Yes. Was there any-
Did we report any parafoveal or foveal effects?
Not to my recollection.
I don't think so.
I'll have to go and double check.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it may be that we have done that, right, and I just can't remember it. I'm not saying that we haven't, but it was just, I didn't expect to see that there. But
Sorry,
anyway,
yeah, well, yeah, okay. I will double check. I'll let you know.
I will too.
Okay, we probably all know what parafoveal effects are. But basically, it's in this situation here, it would be where the anomaly, for example, of carrots is picked up on the preceding word. So when it's picked up on when you're fixating the word large. And actually, it was found in this experiment's reported. But I think it was just when the eye fell on the last three characters of the preceding word. So these effects are often discounted because they're either very small, lack significance, they weren't obtained during natural reading tasks, or when they were both those things, they're attributed often to mislocated fixations. Okay. I'll move on from that slide. So what we wanted to do then is to look for potential meaning effects being extracted from the paraphobia without getting tied up with all the problems to do with interference. And therefore what we did is we literally just manipulated the plausibility of the target word. So as you can see, participants were provided with a sentence, and the target word, obviously baseline condition, just changed to itself. It either had, or was either a preview in which there was a plausible alternative, an anomalous alternative, which either violated the semantic or grammatical, created semantic or grammatical violations, and there was also just an illegal anomalous condition as well. And only when the eye passed the invisible boundary located before the target word did the actual target word appear. So as far as the participants are aware, they're all reading these sentences, but unknown to them, the preview is being presented with differing levels of plausibility. So what we would expect then from previous research is if attention was, or if any information was being picked up from the parafoveal word, what we would expect is that the anomalous previews would result in longer fixation durations when the target was eventually fixated, compared to if there was a plausible preview. So we're looking for differing levels of interference, and we're not looking for anything to do with facilitation, we're just looking for different levels of interference. And then a non-word preview was just provided, just so that, was included just so that we could gauge the extent of how large the preview benefit was.
So Laura, can I ask you a question?
Mm-hmm.
You know, in this manipulation, which makes perfect sense, and you explained it very clearly, would you expect the so this is kind of like, is this just about not helping, or is it about actively pushing you to the wrong word based on preview, right? So the TIA MNX preview, would you expect reading times to be longer on the target word when you had TIA MNX compared with, say, stress? Which would be longest out of those two?
would say stress.
Because they've gone to the wrong word, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Whereas the other one just creates a little bit of interference, but then I guess you can come back from that because you haven't started processing a different word.
Okay.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Alright, so to get to the design then, so what we did is we wanted to create items in which the parallel processing could optimally occur if it could happen. We wanted to create conditions under which it could actually happen. So we made sure that the pre-target word was always long enough to have enough gravity to pull a fixation. So that was always 6 characters, and it was always high frequency, so it shouldn't absorb too much of too much of the attentional resources. The target word was always 6 or 7 characters in length, so it should always fall within the effective span of apprehension, and it was always high frequency as well, just for ease of processing. I should probably mention that the frequencies were matched, so any effects that we get can't be due to differing frequencies between the conditions. Okay, and then regarding plausibility ratings, we were careful to make sure that the identical and the plausible conditions didn't differ significantly in terms of plausibility ratings, but they were obviously both far, far more plausible than the anomalous, which were right down the bottom. They were very, very, very implausible. Okay. So there were 96 items in total, and each participant was exposed to 24 items from each condition. I think you all know about this. So there were 3 regions. Pre-target region allowed us to look for any parafoveal or favour effects, if we were to get any. The target region would allow us to look for orthographic or, I say semantic, preview benefits. And the spillover region allowed us to look for any delayed costs of employing these previews. You probably all know what skipping and first and last fixation durations are. Gaze was basically all fixations on the region before the eye left in the direction during first pass reading. And go past is the same, except it includes regressions. I think you all know that. Okay. So I'm going to come straight to the results. Just to point out down the bottom, I've tried to make it clear which region I'm talking about. So here you can see we'll be talking about the pre-target region. So this is the region where we would be looking to see if there was any effect, so any parafoveal and foveal effects. So this is basically the earliest point at which the manipulations would have been noticed. And the only effect that we got was in last fixation duration. And sub-analyses revealed that there was no differences at all between the anomalous and the non-word condition, and there was no statistical difference between the identical and plausible condition.
So last fixation duration, how many fixations were you typically getting on the pre-target word?
What in terms of, don't know, off the top of my head.
It's probably asking, was it
Probably
quite
just
often the single fixation duration?
It overlap, and I think it overlaps a lot with, so it was a very similar pattern of data, but these weren't significant for example, first fixation durations. So this would, overlap with single. And because of the length, it was generally, I think it was like 1 point something, but I can't remember exactly. Sorry. Okay. So there was no difference statistically between the identical and the plausible, which is perhaps not surprising because at this stage no changes occurred, so the word to the right was equally plausible in these 2 conditions. When we combined these 2 conditions and compared them to the anomalous condition received significantly lower last fixation durations compared to the combined region. So this is kind of interesting because this isn't what would necessarily be predicted from a mislocated fixations hypothesis. If the fixation was simply mislocated and you're processing the target word from the suboptimal position of the pre-target word, anomalous words should result in longer fixation durations, not shorter fixation durations. So what this seems to fit better with is Alan Kennedy's attractor hypothesis, where something strange in the parafoveal is pulling attention towards it and resulting in shorter fixations. I thought you had my idea.
Why isn't the non-word a lot higher?
Why isn't the anomalous a lot higher?
Oh yeah, the non-word, even from a serial point of view, you're gonna expect the non-word to be like a lot higher because there's absolute junk in the parafoveal. So if you're doing parallel processing in that
Well, I
perspective.
suppose this is the point that it's having the opposite effect. It seems to be attracting attention.
But then the identical has to be below the non-word, right? If the identical is your baseline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you're saying then that the plausible is making them stay long?
These two combined.
Mm.
Yeah, there was no difference between these two. And the anomalous preview, was shorter. But these two combined, there was no difference between them.
And sorry, I'm having
That's okay.
is that 3 milliseconds that we're looking at?
Oh, I think it was 11, 50. These two averaged and compared, I think it was
Okay.
12 milliseconds, 11 milliseconds.
But if you, okay, so, right, I understand what you're saying completely, but there are other ways to look at these data, right, I mean, to be fair. And so, if we take the identical conditions, no change, that's exactly what we're going to get, right? So that's one of your kind of benchmarks or baselines against which you're going to make comparisons. The other one, as Dennis has said, is the norm work, right? So what, if you just added this experiment, you just ran two experimental conditions, and you were doing parafoveal processing to the extent that you were extracting orthography and trying to extract meaningful information from the parafoveal, then what you would definitely predict is what I think anyway, is what Dennis is saying, that the norm work would be much higher than the identical. Just that, if you just have those two conditions in the experiment, right? Now, okay, if you had a different experiment where you had two experimental conditions, but one was identical, the other one had an anomalous word in the parafoveal, so that's just two other of your conditions, right? Then, and you were extracting semantic meaning from parafoveal locations, then you would, without question, have a longer fixation on the pre-target word for the anomalous condition relative to the identical condition, right? So those are two comparisons where we would expect those two rightward cells to be higher than the identical condition, right? Okay, now you say in another experiment where you have an identical and just a plausible condition, just those two conditions. And what you would predict is that there'd be no difference between those, which you've got, right? But if you had all four in together, what you would predict, well, what I would have predicted if they were doing what you were saying, was that those two on the left would be low, and those two on the right would be high, which is exactly the opposite part of what you've got. So if you split it down and you do pairwise, okay, I think you've got one pair that works for you.
The difference, these two combined against the non-word was almost significant, but not quite. Like I think it was like 0.6. Yeah, it was the same basically. It was just lacking significance.
But it feels like I would have thought if you were doing semantic processing in the parafoveal that you should be detecting somehow that the anomaly or the non-word is causing, well, that's a bit weird. And wouldn't that cause a boggle on the word before? If I'm processing,
I guess that's the difference between the theories, though, right? So, like, the attractor hypothesis is that something weird in the parafoveal makes you want to get there quickly to see what's going on there, and that's why.
Fine, but that's not what you started out with. You started out by saying you're looking for parafoveal and foveal effects, and you're trying to demonstrate these parafoveal and foveal effects, right? That's not a attractor hypothesis. The parafoveal and foveal effects, as far as I understand it, demonstrates a sensitivity to semantic information in the parafoveal. I think what you're saying is, because I can show a sensitivity to this information, even though that's causing me to leave the pre-target word earlier, then that at least demonstrates a sensitivity to it. And I'm taking that as a demonstration of parafoveal and foveal effects. And I said, well, fair enough. But I might also say to you, I would have expected you to show some disruption there, because it would be a boggle, right? I mean, the whole point about the study that you're talking about, the Rayner et al. Study, was that when we gave them, the man used the pump to inflate the large carrots. When they looked at carrots, the fixations on carrots went through the roof because it was really, really weird, right? In other words, the thing that you see is not facilitation, speeding up, you see disruption.
But then I think also, so who was it? There was the researchers who were looking for frequency parafoveal and foveal effects, and they can go into it. They're very they go in different directions. They're not very predictable. Sometimes they're in the opposite direction. Sometimes they're. I think Kennedy is been looking at these effects. In corpus, and it seems to be very much related to word lengths, whether you want to take into account what you might call corpus analysis. But I do see what you're saying.
Yeah, I've got two comments. The first one is that the non-word should be higher based on the literature out there. It's been shown over and over that if you have an orthographic non-word, that you have a longer time on the previous word. I can give you a big list of big shows. But this is the comment, but I've got one question, which is that you're combining identical and plausible. and then comparing it to the anomalous one. Is that a priori or is that post hoc?
No, the only reason we did that is because at this stage they are both the same, the word change hasn't happened. When you look at them individually as well, they were definitely, there was a difference between plausible and anomalous.
Wait a minute.
It's not true.
I think
Are they
there's a
both?
significant difference between the pairwise show, there's a significant difference.
Can you just go back to the conditions?
So they're not the same.
It's not the same, right? The
It's
identical
the- it's
plausible houses
houses
versus
fields.
fields.
Yeah, but in terms of there's no manipulation in terms of they're both plausible at that stage. So if you've landed say here, then there's basically, the word's different, but they're both equally plausible. There's no difference in the plausibility ratings. So when you're looking at the pre-target word, the target word should always be equally plausible. That makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I see the point. I wouldn't, well,
So
you're expecting a lot from your matching at that moment when you say that they're identical. So you would have like, you're saying that they might be both plausible, but how about predictability, not just frequency, how about number of syllables, how about you can go through the entire thing, so you're stacking the odds a little bit.
Yeah, but that would be cruel.
What?
That would be cruel.
Anyway, go on, Laura.
I probably should mention actually, we looked at unpredictability ratings and predictability is very, very low. But yeah, I take the
So,
point.
Dennis, what's this list of studies that you said if you've got a non-word in the paraphobia that you get a really long fix on the word before it? Is that true?
Yeah, of course it is. Of course it is. Yeah. You're finding it at the moment already. We've got a study now that shows that when you look at the last 3 characters and the next word is a non-word, like an illegal non-word, you find a longer fixation time. That is out there as like the one thing that, if in an easy reader, they say that is the one candidate for a pre-attentive process, that if you're so close to it that it's absolute junk, like an illegal combination, X, Y, Z. And there's multiple papers have shown that. The old Rayner paper, exact same thing, where Keith shows that the fixation time goes up on the last letters prior to an illegal word.
But that TIA, that trigram could be a real word, right?
Yeah, at the beginning isn't necessarily particularly.
Yeah,
Okay. Anyway, right, fair enough.
Yeah. I thought that in my defence, not very good at defending it. Starr and Inhofe as well. They also found a similar effect to what I'm just reporting. Where are they? It wasn't quite significant, but they found a similar effect within a contextually inconsistent word with paraphobia, resulted in shorter fixation durations that they thought was more akin to.
Yeah, I think that's right, actually.
Is that the Brothers study?
I think so.
Oh, okay. I think we've finished with that slide. Okay, so on to the target word then. So this is the word that underwent the manipulation. So skipping rates were very low, probably because of the length of the target word, and were unaffected by the manipulations. But as you can see, the prior preview...
It's beautiful!
Yeah. It affected a range of measures in a very consistent way. So the identical was associated with shortest fixation durations. Plausible seemed to create slightly longer fixation durations, but most of the, obviously, they're the anomalous, and most of the structures seem to be associated with illegal anomalous. So when we put these together, what we find is just the standard orthographic preview benefit. So when we look at the difference between the non-word condition and when it was identical, standard in 20, 33 and 58 milliseconds in first gaze and go past time. So this has been replicated again and again, doesn't help differentiate from the models, shows that obviously the experiment seems to be working, other than that it's not particularly informative. Okay, so regarding when one plausible word changed to another, so this is when our plausible word changed to the identical preview. So for example, bought fields changed to bought houses, for example. Seems the word change was noticed pretty quickly, longer first fixation durations. Interestingly, nothing in gaze, but it seems to be perhaps, as the 14 millisecond in go past suggests, because this includes regressions, perhaps it was recognised straight away, but the response was to regress. But again, this doesn't really inform on whether anything higher level was being extracted from the paraphobia. This also could be just due to a lack of orthographic overlap. So to do that, we need to look at the differences between the anomalous and the plausible words previews. And when we do that, what we see is an increase in gaze duration of 14 milliseconds. So sorry, probably got that around the wrong way. The anomalous previews were associated with a 14 millisecond increase in gaze. Go past was associated with a 25 millisecond increase. And when we combine the target region and the spillover region for gaze duration, this resulted in an increase of 48 milliseconds for following anomalous compared to following a plausible word. And this was significant. So this seems to be the direction that you would expect with longer fixation durations following the anomalous compared to the plausible preview. So it seems that perhaps the meaning, or at least high-level processing of the parafoveal word had happened, had occurred, and obviously when you then land on the target word, this interferes to a different extent, depending on what the preview was. Okay. All right, so regarding spillover region, so this is the three...
Hang on.
Yeah.
Can we go back one?
Mhm.
Okay, so have you got any... This is the difference between the plausible and anomalous, the previews. This is the preview effect, right, in the plausible and the anomalous condition. So you're looking at the difference between the identical and the plausible, and the identical and the...
Shall I?
Sorry.
Yeah, no, sorry, maybe I should have done it better. So it's basically these two conditions here.
Yeah.
So it's not the identical condition, because that's when the word changes to itself. It was between, so these two previews were no longer available. So if you hadn't had, if your attention hadn't been on the target word, then yeah, there should be no difference between these two conditions. Because you can only pick them up
Go for a
parafoveally.
little slide forward. Yeah, click again. A bit more. Still there. Go on. So at this point, they're looking at the target word after the change has been triggered, right?
Yes.
So they're always looking at houses.
Yes.
This is very, very interesting. So on that first fix, if you were to do, okay, we've done that in the slide following, right? So your quantify that's about 60, 56, that's about a 20 millisecond effect for the illegal preview. And about 15, 16 millisecond effect for the anomalous one. Is there a difference between that plausible and anomalous? Show me next slide. Yeah. Sorry, I realise
That's okay.
everybody else has gone way behind of me, I'm just catching up. Yeah, okay, that's all good. So first fix this is the difference between the plausible and anomalous previews. So you get it on gaze, and you get it
Just
on
drops
broadcast.
out and go past for by subjects. There was the same trend in the spillover region, which is why we combine the regions. But it was exactly the same trend.
Very interesting, okay.
Okay. Okay. So the spillover region then. So this is the region, the three-word region after the change had occurred on the target word. So we do find an effect in the spillover region in go past time. And basically the plausible, anomalous and illegal word conditions didn't differ from each other in terms of when we compare pairwise comparisons, but they were all associated with longer go past times compared to the identical condition. So I know we normally think that orthographic preview benefits okay in terms of the easy reader model. I'm not sure how well the easy reader model can accommodate or cope with spillover effects that are orthographic in nature. So just to spell it out, I guess, is so as you can see, the target word is masked, and obviously that's going to result in longer fixations when you land on the target word. but the decision to plan a saccade to the next word should only come after L1 has been completed, which includes the extraction of the orthographic and phonological code. Only then should you plan a saccade to the next word. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but I actually don't see any way that the easy reader model, maybe a serial model, but perhaps not that the easy reader model could cope with a spillover effect of this nature. And I think, was it Rheingold in Canada, they did an experiment to look at these sorts of things to see when the effects came out. But yeah.
Yeah, the moment you start with, that's why I'm also more and more shying away from doing these illegal numbers thing. Sometimes people just pick up on them.
Mm.
Now the moment you, I mean consciously, right?
Right.
Now the moment you consciously pick up on one, yeah, you'll probably start looking back at it.
So probably like most people, we don't tend to include if we notice changes in these.
How many were they allowed to notice?
I think I generally allowed on this one like 2. I don't allow it if there's an actual change. If they've noticed a change, just if they say they noticed a flicker or something, then I just, yeah. But I think 2, maybe 3. Certainly far less than 5. I think it was 2. I have to double check. So I write it on my piece of paper when I'm doing an experiment. I always ask them afterwards and I probe them. Did you notice anything strange? I don't want to, yeah. So I keep probing them until they tell me.
So why should these effects not spill over again? Could you just run that past me? Sorry, I'm a really hard day. I'm tired. Chinese tired me out. Everything's empty. Can you explain that again to me, please?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so the target word has its preview denied, okay? So that means when you land on it, you obviously have longer fixation durations on it because you have to start from the beginning.
Yeah.
But you shouldn't plan a saccade to the next word until you've reached the L1 stage. Now, according to Easy Reader, the L1 stage includes the orthographic and phonological extraction of the word. So you should have got that information before deciding to plan a saccade to the next word.
Yeah.
Makes sense. I did actually talk to Eric about this when he was visiting here and he came up and he thought maybe the Easy Reader could possibly account for it if, you start saying, what percentage of fixations were saccaded, and to be honest, he lost me a little bit in his explanation. I didn't really see how it logically followed, but.
And the key point here is that it's just an the nature of this effect is orthographic, right? So it can't be some high-end type thing. It's nothing less of a point.
Yes, it is, but Gopas time is only influenced by rereading times as opposed to the other measures, right?
Sorry.
Gopas time is only influenced by rereading as compared to, say, gaze.
Yes.
So you're talking about people actually going back, and the Easy Reader will usually do that in the higher level processes.
Yeah, yeah.
So your point is valid. I'm just saying, like, from an Easy Reader point of view, the moment you go in something that only shows up in Gopal's time, you're in higher level fields anyway.
Yeah, like the Easy Reader 10, how they explain it. Yeah. I'd have to double check. It was only very significant in Gopal's time. I don't think we got the same trend, I think, in gaze, but it wasn't significant. But yeah, I see it.
What would it, I mean, could that be driven by refixations on the same word? And then Easy Reader might be okay, right?
That would be more if it should be, well, yeah, I'm saying it's got the same kind of go past. So yeah, that would be.
Anyway, I think it's pretty interesting.
Well, to a certain extent, Easy Reader does incorporate spillover, of course, that you have reduced preview benefit on the next word depending on the difficulty of the previous word. So if you take Laura's point that the other conditions are more difficult, if you take that one into account, then it would consider spillover as well. The pivotal thing is, like, if you take that as evidence for, and I think it's very interesting data, I completely agree with Simon on that. If you take that is indeed plausible and anomalous and illegal, that there's a difference between, say, plausible and anomalous. And then they bring it over, then the moment you accept that one, is the moment you accept that you've got a more difficult target word, and then Easy Reader doesn't have difficulties with explaining why there should be spillover. The moment you allow it to be a more difficult word.
I mean, the thing that is striking is the values vary from about 500 milliseconds just over to which is two fixations, right? So you know that in this there's at least two fixes, whether they've made a regression back, in which case easy reader probably could explain it due to this higher order interrupt, or there's a refixation on the word at the very least for the lead bit right. The only way that the go pass can be terminated is a right with saccade over the right boundary of the region.
Yeah.
So what that means is if there's two fixes, which I think is reasonable to suggest there is on average, then you know they've either refixated the word or they've made an initial fixation on it and gone back. And I think that in both those circumstances, I'm not clear exactly, but I suspect that easy reading might have some kind of, the only way that can happen is through some interrupt routine or something weird goes on, I don't know. But so that might kind of spoil your actually very fair spillover explanation. You know, but fair enough. I think it's very interesting.
Alright, well I think that takes us to the end of that experiment then, so all the results I was going to report from experiment 1. So we seem to get a couple of effects, a bit controversial obviously. We seem to have an anomaly-driven parafoveal effect. So that's the first one. And also we seem to get these preview benefits that seem to be modulated by differing plausibilities. So I know we've already discussed point number 1, and yeah, you say there's other explanations, or at least it's not what you would have expected to have happened. And then the other thing that seems, I think, maybe slightly difficult to explain with an easy reader is the orthographic spillover effects.
So let's just, before we go on, let's just pause here for a sec, because I think this all goes back to the old days when Jeff Underwood was doing all this, right? And so, you know, Jeff got a semantic preview. I mean, this is old stuff. This is years ago, nearly 20 years ago. And then Jukka Hyönen did some work and just couldn't replicate this, right? So this is. So what you're doing, really, I mean, you know, it's interesting. Maybe you're doing better control study or whatever, I don't know, but you're basically failing to replicate. And, you know, there might be good reasons why they're failing to replicate. You know, perhaps that earlier study, perhaps it wasn't as strong as we thought it was. But
I've read the stuff by Underwood. I actually can't, because he had a few papers doing this sort of thing.
yeah, that's right, and with Hyönen as well.
Yeah.
But the whole, you know, the whole thing about getting semantic, we would call them parafoveal or foveal effects, right? But effects of semantic information from a non-foveal word.
Yeah.
You know, it kind of panned out that no one got it, and that was how it stood for a very long time. And you're basically doing the same thing, I think. You know, or something that's very similar, but you're finding a quite different effect.
Yeah.
I'll have to look back at those old papers. I can't quite remember the details of them, but I'm pretty sure I'm not misrepresenting it there. I mean, if that's the case, then you know, perhaps there's a bit of literature there that you might want to look at and just see, you know, why you're finding something different to other people.
So like Starr and Inhofe definitely did get the same result. I don't think it was quite significant.
It wasn't significant, I know. I remember that paper quite well, actually.
Yeah.
You say orthographic effects in the spillover region. Are those orthographic? Because
You say? Because there's no difference between these. So they're obviously due to the lack of orthographic overlap to the. You would say? That's right. That's the only reason I called them that.
that's sort of the. Okay, you got. Yeah, I know what you're trying to say, but you got a small effect there, especially for go-past time, where you're not allowed to focus too much on like, oh, it's 20 milliseconds because the standard deviations tend to be so much bigger for go-past time. And you got for condition experiment, it could be that if you had 100 subjects that you actually do find differences between them. I would. Yeah, I'd go easy on interpreting the lack of effects between plausible and anomalous and illegal as pointing towards.
So, well, actually, I'll show you in a moment, but we get a similar effect in the next experiment as well.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. But maybe we'll come back to that when you can see
Yeah,
the
no,
results.
it's
Of your okay.
And then, I mean, one final point, right, and then I swear I'll shut up. Okay, but there's a thing that is missing off this slide. That I mean, basically, you didn't get parafoveal effect. Classic.
Depending on your terminology of the parafoveal.
Well, no, what you've got is an attraction effect.
Yeah.
Right? But what you haven't demonstrated is an influence of the semantics on the fixation duration on the prior word. Right?
And you would have predicted.
And I would have, if I was a
With the junk word.
parafoveal guy, I would have predicted.
Yeah, the junk is the especially the junk condition.
Yeah.
Also, the attraction hypothesis of Kennedy, there's like whether or not that it corresponds to the way the world works or not is irrelevant. You do have, if you say like, oh, it could go either way, which at some point, well, statistically, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to say like, if it goes extreme in this direction, it goes for my hypothesis, and if it goes extreme in the other direction, it goes for my hypothesis. You're just doubling your odds of finding an effect. If you can say now it attracts me, and now it actually makes me stay longer, and that was the original Kennedy model where they had the possibility of shift, stop, or attract, but all three options, and they literally said, oh, it's difficult to predict in advance which one it was going to be, but that means that you're tripling the odds of actually finding something that works for you.
Okay, I take your point, yeah.
Hmm.
But I do think, I take your point, I do. But also, I mean, it has been shown that these effects do sometimes, if you look at the frequency, sometimes they go in one direction, sometimes they go in the other direction. And whether, I mean, there's all sorts of things, even within controlled experiments, that we don't know whether we've controlled for, like the first 3 characters of the word, which are certainly the first 2-3 characters are very important. And yeah, I don't know, all sorts of things that wouldn't have been controlled. And obviously, word length very much seems to influence, according to Kennedy, the way these effects, I think, fall. But I don't know enough about it.
Let's go to the next experiment. I'm not buying the
I
parafoveal
didn't
focal
think
effect that much, but what I want to say, just to make sure that I'm giving some positive feedback while I'm going, is that your plausibility manipulation looks very interesting on the target word. Yes, definitely. The rest is like we're talking about the milliseconds and the discussion we've been having it for going on 2 decades. We're not going to resolve it here, right, Laura? But your main effects, the ones on plausibility, are very interesting. Definitely.
Wow. I'll stop there then. I'm happy with that. Okay, well, just to make sure then that these effects weren't due to mysticated fixation or tracking error, what we did is we inserted, so we had exactly the same items. Sorry, I really struggle with saying the word adjective, so you'll have to ignore my really bad, I can't say it. We inserted an adjective between what was the pre-target and the target word. So in terms of definitions now, I'm going to keep referring to the target as the target. So that was the word that had undergone the manipulations. But now I'll just refer to the verb as the verb and the adjective as the adjective. And as you can see, the contingent change happened immediately after the verb. So the adjective was always 4 letters long and always high frequency. So that's the only thing that we changed. All the sentences were the same. We just inserted the 4-letter adjective. Okay.
I'm not clear. So have you now got 2 changes?
Oh, sorry, I didn't say actually. Yeah, so the adjective was either presented with a valid or an invalid reading.
And what's happening with the target?
The
Is that all?
target was exactly the same as before. We're basically doing exactly the same experiment again,
Yeah.
except that we've put in the 4-letter adjective, and that was presented either with a valid or an invalid reading.
Yeah.
At the moment they hit the adjective, the target will automatically go to houses, right?
Yeah, so basically looking like an N+2 effect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
got
Yeah. So I'll come straight to the results for this experiment. So on the verb, we get no parafoveal or foveal effects, or how wrong.
No attraction or anything like that?
No attraction.
Oh,
No.
amazing.
So not even when the adjective was junk?
No, nothing significant, no. Okay, yeah, so no orthographic parafoveal and foveal effects, and nothing stemming from the target word either. Okay, so I'm going to just very quickly run through just the effects from masking the adjective before going on to obviously what we're interested in, which is the plausibility manipulation from the target word. So we just get the standard orthographic preview benefit with less skipping and longer fixation durations when you receive an invalid preview. So again, this has been replicated again and again. Doesn't really help differentiate between models at all. But what we do seem to get, we seem to get the spillover. So this is what I was saying, we get the same spillover effect. So as you can see, this one was just significant engaged duration between the identical and the non-word condition. But the non-word condition received longer fixation durations compared to the identical condition.
This is on the target.
This is on the target word, yeah. Okay. Okay, so this is obviously what we're interested in. So the only effects that we got in terms of our parafoveal plausibility manipulation.
Can you go back to that slide?
Yes.
So, how do you know that effect is caused by the adjective and not by the noun?
Is that just because you collapse across the four conditions, maybe?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It didn't interact with the target word manipulations at all.
Yeah, okay. But fine, I accept that. But what I'm trying to say is, though, you're saying that this is the spillover from the adjective, are you?
Yes. And it's on the target word that did go undergo the manipulations. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not getting into easy read or anything like that. I'm just thinking that in the compound here, that it also at that same time, the target also changed. And so you're attributing it to the adjective change, but the target also changed. And so you're saying this is a spillover associated with the adjective, and I'm saying, well, it might be, or it might be just the effect that's associated with the houses changing.
It could be, I think what Simon would say is that it could be helpful, for instance, if you present these data, you can keep that specific comparison, but that you show the results for the 2x4.
Okay.
And then if you can see that actually you have the same effect for each condition, then you know that it will probably be something that carries
I think
over.
that's probably right. But all I'm trying to say is that I suspect that there's a compound like the same. But that's on go past again. Right?
Yeah. I actually get these effects quite often. I don't often see spillover regions reported in journals. I saw Anglais, he had a spillover effect, but it went in the opposite direction to the ones that I get. So he got that in one of his papers. But yeah, you don't often see the spillover regions.
I mean, look at you. Is it in first fixation durations?
It didn't happen in first fix gaze.
So again, it's only on the post. So you're talking about an effect at the moment of them going back to an adjective.
That happened.
Yeah.
Is that graph labelled correctly? That y-axis?
No.
Right, that's fine.
I mean, it should be co-post, yeah. Okay.
Fine, right. So if that's supposed to be go past, then look at the times, right? It's 230 milliseconds, which means they're making one fixation. This is a bit weird.
Okay. Dundee measures,
Right.
including zeros.
Oh, okay.
Okay, for go-post you mean.
But, for go past and gaze, but we do now, ever since Keith took exception to the Dundee measures, as he calls them, we look at the other way as well, and if the results are the same. Yeah.
Okay.
But we're continuing to report the Dundee measure because that's when the case. Okay. Right, so the manipulations then of the target word, so these were only expressed on the target word itself. So there's nothing, as I've already said, on the verb, and there was also nothing on the adjective either. But on the target word, there was an apparent interaction in gaze duration. Some analyses revealed that absolutely there was nothing going on at all when the adjective was masked. Okay, but when the adjective was presented in this with an identical preview, we kind of get the same pattern as before, with identical previews being associated with the shortest fixation duration, followed by the plausible previews, followed by the enormous previews, which seem to have highest cost of having, the highest cost.
Can you go back one slide, Laura?
That one?
Yeah, so for you to do the analysis that you're wanting to on your next slide, you've got to get a 2x4 interaction that's reliable, yeah? Is that 2x4 interaction reliable?
That one falls short of reliable. It's reliable and go past, which is the next slide. But this one does just fall short. The next go past it was reliable.
And that was gauge duration, yeah.
Would you have predicted an effect in masked?
Sorry?
Would you have predicted an effect in masked? So at the moment you're telling me that this is...
Just for when it was...
So this is significant, but there's nothing going on here for masked, right?
Yeah, so I guess perhaps what you're alluding to is the fact that if it's valid, then you could do a double attention shift.
No, I'm actually saying like if you take parallel processing seriously, you should pick up something in the next of n+2. And you're showing that that is not happening. If n+1 is junk, you've got your flat line. Which is not necessarily incompatible with a parallel model. It will just be like that. You've got this one thing that is sucking up all the attention, lexical processing, lexical
it prevents the
activity.
attention from spreading to the next word.
Yes, yeah.
So I'm not sure that the parallel model would predict this.
If they say that it blocks, but if it's without it, but that would be like, for instance, in Swift, you can't block it. If the moment it's in the perceptual span, it will be processed.
Yeah, but I mean, it might be that something that's really, really weird or hard to process, or something it peaks and it stays high for a long, long time, and then it falls slowly, so that would mean that you don't get a good chunk to the.
Yes, yeah, you're definitely predicting reduced effects.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so go to the next slide. This is interesting.
And I just wanted to point out that the difference between the identical and the anomalous, that was significant. So you spend significantly longer on the target following an anomalous word compared to an identical. Compared to when it had an identical.
Is this mimicking your data from the first experiment?
Apart from the non-word condition, which was obviously higher.
Higher.
No, it was higher. Yeah.
But maybe I think it's probably fair to assume that the plausible and the anomalous previews perhaps will continue to have interference because that's obviously trying to deal with high-level meanings, and lots of these effects do come out further downstream, whereas any interference being caused by the non-word perhaps was starting to come back down by this point, because this is 2 words downstream.
Okay, so but you're saying this is an interaction in case, right? But you didn't get the interaction, did you?
It just fell short of significance, but in go past it was significant. Which increased the regressions. And it's exactly the same story. So only significant when the adjective was valid, and with a significant difference between identical and anomalous again. And this is when the adjective, remember, was 4 characters in length.
Go back one click. One more click. That's it. Why would the reading time in the identical condition when the adjective was masked? The adjective's always masked, right?
What's this our spillover effect?
The adjective's always, this is on the target word.
This is on the target word. The light grey is when the adjective was masked, and there's no difference between the conditions. But it was, if you remember then from a couple of slides ago, it was always significantly higher.
Yeah, but in the identical condition. In the identical condition, is the adjective masked as well? I'm sorry.
So this is split by whether the adjective was masked or not. So here, the adjective was was not masked. Here, the adjective was masked. So the higher level is our spillover effect.
Yeah. So all in every single experimental condition, the adjective prior to the boundary change was junk.
Oh no, it was either valid or junk.
Valid
It was a
or junk.
2x4 design.
Yeah. And so in that identical condition,
Maybe my
Did
labels
the
aren't
word
very well.
did the word huge appear to the right of the boundary in the identical?
That's it.
Yes,
yeah,
identical meant there was no change, just like a valid or identical, whatever label you put in. There was no word change.
Even in the master condition?
Yeah. No, the master, there is a change, right?
Yeah, okay. I understand, sorry. I'm doing a bit slow again.
Maybe it's my graph.
Okay, no. Okay.
Okay. I'm actually kind of at the end. Sorry, did you have a question? Or you just stretched
Sorry.
through? No, it's okay.
Sorry.
And yeah, I already said there was the anomalous gauge duration for the anomalous previews was significantly longer than for the identical, and that's it. So we're just going to come to the conclusions. So we get this spillover effect that seems to maybe have its origins with the lack of orthographic preview. We've got our normally driven parafoveal effect. We got a preview benefit that was modulated by plausibility, which seems to extend when we put a word in the middle. So when there's this intervening for a character word, we seem to still get the same pattern of effects. So whether or not the models can cope with these data then, so the normally driven parafoveal or foveal effect may be slightly difficult to explain, but all the other effects probably could be explained by serial models if we maybe slightly loosen the link between fixation, location and attention. But serial models in general I think probably could cope with these results. Maybe parallel models are slightly more compatible, but there's all sorts of problems there. Obviously, the models themselves aren't as well defined. Whether or how they're going to be able to cope with multiple words becoming available, the meaning of multiple words becoming available at the same time, or whether they don't come available at the same time, they just come available out of order. I'm not sure how they can actually account for that within the models. So,
So the only thing I've always had, right, and this is not me talking easy reader, not me talking Swift, is that one of the most surprising findings I always thought was that there was no semantic pre-processing. So you could do orthography, you could do phonology, and you could do skipping of a predictable word, right? But you can't reach semantics. So this is the idea that in the information that's coming in from the parafoveal, that probably you have orthography, phonology, semantics in this order, sort of.
yeah.
That if you reach this level, you can do it for skipping, but you can't do it for fixation terms.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in Chinese, I'm pretty sure that there's slightly stronger evidence towards semantic pre-processing,
Yeah.
right?
Well, so there's the paper by, I think it was at TAM recently, was it with Kliegel? I think you're doing some stuff as well, you know, Chinese people, pointing at you, so behind you. Oh, right, oh, you're doing it with, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know an awful lot. I've read a couple of papers, and yeah, it does seem to.
So my question is always like, I've always been a bit puzzled by this, but it's the first time I actually hear somebody say out loud that it would be incompatible with a serial model. It's incompatible with the views advocated, like people like Keith who don't believe it because they've done a couple of experiments and not found it.
Mm-hmm.
But to say that it was incompatible with the idea of a serial model is just like, for me it's more about like how far can you get
She
into
said it's
thinking?
not incompatible. There's a not in there.
Wait,
Are not necessarily incompatible.
She's saying it's compatible.
wait,
Just
can
maybe
you go
to
to the beginning of the talk? Because there you have a slide that definitely says like...
Okay, so semantic preview benefits are not, I actually wrote not typically, I was careful to put typical in there, but are not typically predicted, because obviously then you got to assume perhaps a double attention shift that you were going to skip.
But why you're doing parafoveal processing, right? I'm getting in orthography, unambiguous, the uncontroversial.
Yeah.
I'm reaching the level of phonology,
Mm-hmm.
unambiguous.
Mm-hmm.
I can skip a predictable word,
Mm-hmm.
unambiguous. But then I hit like, can I reach semantic information from the parafoveal, and then all of a sudden we've got a controversy. And I've always found this controversy, in my opinion, to be data-driven because people don't find it, but not necessarily to be theory-driven because models predict the absence of threat. What do you think, Simon?
Well,
Would you say that it's...
I understand exactly what you're saying, Dennis, and I think it's a really fair point that you're making. I mean, honestly, I think I kind of agree with you about that. It's like, where's the brick wall?
Yeah, where's the brick wall?
But the thing I'm a little bit confused about, and perhaps it relates very directly to what you're saying, is that I can't understand. So I find this really interesting. So you're getting semantic effects in terms of preview, but what I don't get is, so doesn't this mean that they have to have got hold of the semantic information associated with the target word before they actually look at it, right?
I think it depends. So I've done some reading, and there's some literature that says that you can, probably shouldn't be saying this, but there's some literature that says you can pick out like syntactic abnormalities. I don't quite understand, I don't necessarily agree with it, but there is some literature that says that you can pick this up prior to, and this is pre-lexical.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. But what I'm trying to say is, you've got, like I said, the data are beautiful.
The
Right?
preview effect seems to point towards semantic
That's
processing,
right.
right?
That's exactly right.
And what I'm saying is that, like, we're constantly saying, oh, that looks interesting, and it looks really clean. I'm not buying into your parafoveal foveal effect.
No, exactly.
But you're not going to write a parafoveal foveal
No,
effect
you're
paper
gonna
on this.
write-
You're
you're
going to
gonna
write
write
semantic
semantic
pre-processing,
pre-processing.
and it looks like good stuff,
Exactly.
and you will probably get.
I think
Looks
this
like a
could be a
decent
very,
idea.
very, very important paper. This is a clear. I mean, the data are beautiful, and so you just sit there and you just go, well, it's working.
The only thing I would,
But
like, for
doesn't that
instance,
mean you get semantic information from parafoveal words?
probably their data point in that
That's
direction.
it, exactly. And then
But the
doesn't
only
that mean
thing-
parafoveal
Yeah.
foveal effects?
What?
Doesn't that mean parafoveal and foveal effects? Not.
No, it means parafoveal processing
It
because
means
they only show up when you
parafoveal,
run the next word.
But yes, if we chain it through on the models, then wouldn't that mean though that you'd have to get the effect? Like what I said to you.
But every preview manipulation, that shows up on the next word is
It's got to be.
parafoveal
That's
processing,
right,
right?
exactly.
But to get parafoveal foveal effect, it has to influence the fixation time.
I absolutely understand. I mean,
Yeah, of course.
But so we get into this nuanced argument about what parafoveal and foveal effect actually constitutes, right? Or what constitutes a parafoveal and foveal effect. But I think that the data are, to me anyway, are incontrovertible. I mean, I haven't scrutinised them, right? But incontrovertible in relation to the semantic preview.
Yeah, I think they're very the only, and that's sort of like a. If I were a review for this paper, the only thing that I'm missing in your talk, and that is just like the next step to think about it, why does it only show up in GoPups now? That is a bit of a weird one because everything you've shown us is GoPups time.
Well, and the gaze as well, it was showing up in gaze, it was less than 0.05 per subject equals 0.06 on items.
But I'm talking about both experiments, and it was a continuous story that you were telling, and like, yes, you found a couple of things there, right? But there was a lot of things where you went like this and this. Oh, I only have it significant in GoPups. That you
Yes,
probably want to think
data.
about. Why is this such a big effect?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
It's not a criticism. It's more like something I
how
want to
many
tell you.
subjects have you run in these two experiments?
In the last one, it was 56.
It's quite a lot.
Big.
And mind you, that's an 8-condition experiment, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's only 6 subjects per cell.
Well,
I think
it depends on how many stimuli do you have?
No,
Seven
7
subjects
subjects per cell.
per cell.
Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry. What about your first one?
96 items.
Yeah, no, it says a good power study there. Yeah.
7 subjects again per file.
Okay, so it's quite a lot. I mean, I wonder if you just run that, 8 or 9 or 10 per cell, you might well get the effects coming on gates.
But I think it's important there. If you're just missing significance, because if it's not close to it, you mean you got a late effect. But that's something like a GoPups time is almost something categorical if you find something in gaze, not in gaze but in GoPups, because it means like I'm going back. Yeah, and there's something that's happening there, which is a different interpretation of something continuously added to a fixation time.